Hey, welcome to the Healthful Woman Podcast, the fastest growing podcast on women's health. Today's Monday, November 25th, 2024. My guest today is Shaindie Zlotowitz. Now, Shaindie told her birth story on our High Risk Birth Stories podcast back in 2021. At the time, her story included a 23-week loss in another country, followed by the birth of her daughter Chaya in 2020 with us in New York City. Now, instead of redropping that podcast for all of you to hear, Shaindie volunteered to come back to the studio to retell her story. Bonus feature content includes the birth of her second daughter, Ellie, in 2023. Now, Shaindie is not our first return guest, but she is definitely the first to tell her birth story twice. So thank you, Shaindie, for volunteering to tell your story again. We really appreciate it. A few reminders: The Unexpected, the book I wrote with Emily Oster, is available wherever you buy books. Second, please continue to email us questions you have for our mailbag podcasts. Please remember, these are for the mailbag, not your own personal medical advice. All right, thanks for listening. Hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving this week, and we'll see you all next week.
Welcome to today's episode of Healthful Woman, a podcast designed to explore topics in women's health at all stages of life. I'm your host, Dr. Nathan Fox, an OBGYN and maternal fetal medicine specialist practicing in New York City. At Healthful Woman, I speak with leaders in the field to help you learn more about women's health, pregnancy, and wellness. Shaindie, welcome back to the podcast, this time face-to-face, mano a mano, in person.
How are you doing?
I'm doing terrific. It's nice to see you. It's always nice to see you. We've known each other a long time, and you are the first person on this podcast to come back and retell a birth story. So not just tell a birth story, but tell it again, to retell it. Because
let's do it.
Yeah, we learned that your previous birth story is nowhere to be found.
Also, it was on the phone, so it was like fuzzy a little bit.
Yeah, I was on the phone. We were different time zones, different countries. It was a different time in our lives. So it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you always.
So we're going to talk back. I guess we'll go all the way back to first pregnancy. So when you told the birth story, this was it's 2021. That's when it dropped. So we're now in 2024, I believe. So it dropped 3 years ago. And at the time, you were talking about your loss that you had in another country. You were talking about it from that country at the same time. And then we talked about the following pregnancy leading to your oldest daughter in 2020, right? Who was at the time a year old. And subsequent to that, you have another daughter who's now a year old.
Son.
What did I say?
Daughter.
Correct. You had a son who is now a year old.
Yeah.
And so we are sort of like parallel, but we're going to go back and
I
revisit
literally remember
everything.
where I was sitting when we did it. So yeah.
I know,
hoping that you wouldn't wake up.
Yeah. And I was sitting right here.
Yeah.
Same chair, but we were using a phone. So tell us a little bit about yourself. We're going way back to before your pregnancy career began.
Before my pregnancy career began, well, I'm the oldest of 8. So I definitely have experience reflecting on people having babies and babies in my life. But yeah, I had no personal experience with pregnancy. And when I found out that I was pregnant, my first pregnancy, I right away was went into this hypochondriac state. And I was sure something was wrong with my pregnancy. I remember so clearly by my first ultrasound saying to the sonographer, do you see the placenta? And she's looking at me who are you? What are you talking about? And I was just I was just very nervous overall. And it wasn't warranted.
Mm-hmm.
There was no good reason for it, but I was definitely very nervous. And I did from very early on not feel great.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the beginning of my first pregnancy. But what were the odds that something was going to actually not be great?
Were you like that in general, in your life, for other medical things or other things in your life that you're sort of prepping yourself for the worst, that type of thing? Or was it unique to pregnancy?
So I would say I'm really not a nervous person in general. I would say very laid back. But when it comes to medical things, that always, I was always more the nervous type.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. Although it's funny because like I am like the type, like I'll research things that I'm experiencing, and like I always was interested in different medical experiences. If I wasn't a mom, maybe I'd be a doctor. But yeah, I don't know. I was definitely like on the more nervous side. And then like as my pregnancy started to progress and I started like getting different like hints that something was maybe possibly brewing, I definitely got more nervous, which was at that point warranted.
Right. Now so at the time you're young. I mean, how old are you at the time?
Very young.
Right.
I'm going to say 23 maybe.
Right. So you're 23. You're the oldest of 8 siblings. So you don't have any older sisters who have gone through this. You're in another country, so you're not around your mom, your parents. Like, who were you talking to? Who were you turning to? Was it nobody, or did you like just do it over the phone? Or because, people have questions and just want to talk about things.
So it happens to be that it worked out for me that I come to America in like a few weeks into my pregnancy, and then again like a few weeks later. So I did get to meet with, I think it was Dr. Gottlieb at the time. And like, I did call the nurses if I had a question. And I was definitely like, in the practice here also, which is always a comfort for me. Like that I
like a satellite member of our
like
practice.
A safe place to rely on. And then so, I had a doctor, which it's just a very different experience, the whole medical system there. And specifically when it comes to pregnancy, most people use midwives and don't use private doctors.
This is in Israel we're talking about.
We're talking about Israel. So most people don't use private doctors. And even within the private doctors, it's a very, very different system overall. And me being nervous, like I didn't really trust anyone. So you should be honored to trust you guys. But so I didn't really have necessarily anyone there. I didn't have an older sister. I didn't have my mom. I didn't have any real family there with experience. And even like within my friends, I didn't really have anyone that I could rely on.
Right.
With like questions or nerves or anything.
Plus, they're all going to be about your age.
Right.
How many kids do they have? One.
Right.
And so it's just whatever.
Personal experience.
Yeah. Well, they had their own 1, maybe 2 kids. Exactly. Like if they went well, they'd be like, oh, I don't know.
Right. Exactly. I kind of became the person at this point now that like whenever anyone has any pregnancy related anything.
Right. So there you are. You are the doctor.
Yeah. Yeah. I got away scot-free with medical school,
Fair. All right. Good. But you don't bill these people for this advice.
Yeah, exactly.
It's free. All right. You're a free doctor. That's good to know.
Yeah.
If you're in Israel, find Shaindie, the free doctor.
So then I wasn't feeling great. I was in America, summertime, and I had a lot of pressure on my back. And I kept saying, I feel like the baby's pushing down. Like that's what I kept saying. I feel like it's climbing out.
And how far along were you at this time?
I would say 18 weeks when I like really started feeling it. I had already a few weeks before that I wasn't feeling great, but I had come in here and we checked and everything was great. Again, at 18 weeks, I came in, we did an anatomy scan then and everything looked great. I went back to Israel right after that appointment and moved apartments the day I came back to Israel and didn't have air conditioning that day. And I was really not feeling great. And then I started getting very nauseous. My stomach was hurting me a lot and I had a day of vomiting, basically.
And this is in the summer, right?
This is in the summer, the dead of the summer there.
Yeah, and it's for those who may not know, it's hot in Israel in the summer.
It almost gets hotter before it gets cooler. So like right now, like August time when like starts cooling off here a little bit, it's when it's at the peak there.
Yeah.
So it was really hot. I did not have air conditioning for that day. We were waiting for it to be installed and I was vomiting a whole day. And I ended up going into the hospital because for fluids, I was really like, I couldn't hold down an ounce of water. And I ended up doing a sonogram there just to make sure everything was okay with the baby. Everything was good. And then about a week later, I was still having that pressure that I've been feeling all along. So, and I was nervous from the whole vomiting experience that maybe it did cause something to progress, even though at the time I had done a sonogram and everything looked okay. But just to be safe, I went in for an appointment and I checked and everything was fine. So I kind of like had that, like in retrospect, like I had that to reflect on, like to see how things progressed or didn't progress. Like everything was okay at that point, which was a week after this whole vomiting experience. And then 3 days later, I think it was, I was sitting in my apartment maybe making dinner or whatever, nothing unusual. And I started feeling something that was definitely different. I started having contractions. I started timing them at that point, and they were like 20 minutes apart or so. Now that I know a little bit more about giving birth, like I think 20 minutes apart doesn't necessarily need to be anything.
Right.
It was definitely feeling unusual for me and something different. And after 20 minutes apart, they were definitely progressing and getting more painful and getting closer together. And to the point when I was uncomfortable and I was standing, like I felt like I had to sit down. So at that point, I called my doctor and he said to meet him in the hospital. So I didn't even feel like a sense of urgency at all. I had my husband was out. I waited until he came home. I didn't even bother calling him. And then when he came home, we hopped in a cab and we headed to the hospital.
It's also unusual in Israel that your doctor would meet you in the hospital, right? Like for most people in the system, you may or may not have a doctor you see for your visits. And then when you go to the hospital, it's just like a new set of people. Like go to the hospital, they'll take care of you. They don't know you, you don't know them, but it's a system, like whatever. Yeah, it's not like it doesn't work. It's just very different.
It's definitely different. So this doctor was like, specifically a private doctor that would be a doctor that I would call on his cell phone and let him know I'm in labor, and he was supposed to meet me in the hospital. So, so we had gone there, and it's funny because this doctor's, I think he was Russian or whatever, and his English is not so great. I guess Russian or Hebrew, He does an ultrasound and he looks at me and he says, 0 survival. I'm like,
that's it?
Like, okay, like, can you tell me something? Like, I heard the heartbeat. I saw there was a baby there. What does that mean? So he tells me that basically it's inevitable. And he said the baby's aborting itself. Like these were the terminologies he was using. And I'm going to give birth now. So.
And you're how far at this time? I guess 20,
so
22?
I was 22, 5 days.
Yeah.
So I don't know about how in America, but I know that in Israel, they won't do any heroic action before 24 weeks. So if the baby was born and needed resuscitation, they wouldn't do.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true now. It might be 23 weeks. I don't know, but somewhere in that range.
This is also a few years ago.
At 22 weeks, it's,
They were not going to do anything. And the doctor wanted me to take Pitocin at the time. I didn't feel comfortable with that. I kind of felt like, you never know,
Right. If it happens on its own, it happens.
Let's let this happen on its own. Why would I want to accelerate something that I don't want to happen?
Right.
So the doctor had left at that point. It's funny. I think the last time we recorded this, I was still angry at the doctor kind of for leaving at that point. I think that in my immediate, the way I felt in my, the postpartum period after that pregnancy was very much the doctor abandoned me. Basically, I was pretty much, for all practical purposes, left in triage with nobody, no one taking care of me. And it happens to be that, Israelis love babies, like everyone says. I know from anyone who's had positive experiences, which is many people I know, who's had positive experiences in Israel, they love babies, they love delivering babies, they love whatever. So I happen to have had a personal negative experience there.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily reflect the maternity ward in general.
Right.
But
it's also very different because you're there, you're pregnant, you're delivering, but it's different. Right. Because you're delivering a baby, you're miscarrying essentially. You're delivering a baby, it's not going to survive. Exactly. And so it's what do they do with you? And so obviously there is a way to do it that's hopefully, kinder and gentler and a little bit, but all right, that didn't happen, Exactly. It didn't happen.
So he had left at that point, and it was me and my husband in triage basically. And at some point my father-in-law has lots of different connections in Israel, and he called a few different people who he knows who were involved in the hospital, and they sent people down, and I had a midwife come in special. She was incredible, and she basically more for the hand holding than for anything else. Really everything was progressing as a normal birth should. I went from 4 centimeters to 10 centimeters to ultimately giving birth, and they ended up having to call the doctor on call because at some point I wasn't contracting anymore. But ultimately, I gave birth, and the baby, passed, I would say, probably a minute or two before. Throughout the whole labor, the baby was okay. And then, I would say, within the last minute or two, that's when it had ended. And that was it for that pregnancy. So,
right. When you delivered, the baby was a boy, right?
The baby was a boy, yeah.
Did you hold him? Was that a discussion? Was that something you're trying to figure out whether you would or wouldn't? Because some people do, some people don't in that circumstance.
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. when I was in labor, I totally had the foresight to think about this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like interesting, like how like things like play out. But my very close friend had a stillbirth, I would say about 6 months before. And she had held her baby, and she was really in the grieving period still. And she was talking about it a lot. And it's even interesting that she was talking about it because she's a private person.
Mm-hmm.
So, but she was talking about it a lot with me. And I felt like based on her experience, I didn't really want to hold the baby. And my mother also had a stillbirth, and I knew that she did hold the baby. And I wanted her insight. So I had my husband call her in the middle while I was in labor. And her opinion and suggestion was, if there's anything you think you slightly want to do, you should, so that you don't have regret. But just like follow your gut. Like if you feel like you really don't, like there's nothing wrong with that. And if you feel like maybe you would do, but you're nervous, go with it because you don't want to have regret.
Right. That's good advice.
Yeah. And basically I really strongly did not want to. I didn't want to connect to the baby. I didn't want to be emotionally stuck on that pregnancy. Like I just wanted to have another baby already.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really just wanted to have a baby. So for me, it was like my like immediate reaction was like, close this chapter. Let's like move on, which is funny because it's a little disconnected of me, but that's the way I felt in the moment.
Listen, people, there's no good way to process this. Right. Like it's a horrible loss. Some people process losses differently, and it's not going to be the same thing for two different people.
Exactly.
And you're right. You have to go with your gut. You know yourself better than anyone knows you. So someone telling you this is what you should do, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. Right, but you saying to yourself, this is what I should do, has a much higher chance of being right.
Right. Exactly.
You can also be wrong, right? Exactly. Who knows? There's always regret in life, but there isn't a good way to do this. I mean, like, how could you get through this in a good way? It's horrible. The whole thing is horrible.
A baby that early could be scary looking. I didn't want to be waking up in the middle of the night,
nightmares,
thinking about this baby and reflecting on it. And I also didn't want that when I did eventually have living children, I didn't want to ever line up my births. I didn't want to feel like holding this baby, holding that baby. Like I wanted that to be almost like a miscarriage. Like that's
right. Understood.
That's what I wanted to name it in my head.
Right. So you have the delivery, and then what happens? You just go home? Like what happens afterwards?
So
because you don't stay for 2 or 3 days, right?
So I mean, so they would have wanted to keep me a little bit longer, but I was out. I was get me home. My parents were landing in Israel. They hopped on a plane as soon as they heard what was happening. They were landing in Israel. So as soon as they would let me out of the hospital, I was running right out of there. And thank God everything was good. And I actually have an interesting thing. I don't know if I ever discussed this with you, but in Israel, my blood type is not positive. And in America, my blood type is positive.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't let me out until I got the Rogam shot.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to get it until I spoke to you guys because I was like, I didn't know if there was harm in getting it if I don't need it.
Right.
So that delayed things a few hours until.
Yeah, that's a separate. There's a type of the positive or negatives, whether you have this thing called the D, and there's a big D or there's no D, but there's some people there's some people it's called a weak D. It's like a form of it that it's not that in some countries yes, some countries no. It's various blood banks can pick it up, and various blood banks
I must think that it's more sensitive blood bank here that they're able to pick it up as a positive.
But even here, you'll sometimes have two different labs, two different blood banks. One calls you positive, one calls you negative. So we have that even within the U.S. that happens. So it's not, I don't think it's Israel versus U.S. It's that happens all the time. And we know what that is. And you technically don't need the ROGAM. That's known. But the blood banks, they still want to give it to you. Whatever. Anyway, but it's not harmful. It's not harmful to get it if you don't need it. It's not harmful to get it if you don't need it. It's okay. Yeah.
So anyways, so I had to wait until you guys opened to get that. And then I was out of the hospital. And that was it. And then I started, I guess, that grieving period. And it was a really dark period for me. It was really, really, it was a lot. I speak to people all the time who have, late pregnancy losses. And I always, I speak to them usually right after. And I always forward them, this is really a challenging time for you. It's going to be really, really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
And it takes a long time.
And it takes a long time. And I'm lucky that for me, I knew very strongly that I needed to have another baby to be okay. And I'm lucky that that worked out that way and that I did get pregnant pretty soon afterwards.
By choice. I mean, you felt part of your healing had to be to get pregnant.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I know that people feel differently. Like, some people may feel like they need the time to like sit in that pregnancy and that loss and kind of like give that, baby the focus maybe it deserves or different people have different ways of healing. But I knew myself and I knew that I needed to be a mother. And that was like I was determined.
Yeah, it's different per person. It's different per experience. And sometimes it's different because you didn't have children yet. Right. And so, there's nothing else you're focusing on really. You're only focused on the loss. Now, it doesn't mean if you have children that have a loss, it's not equally painful. But you also have to, like, you have your kids, like, they're waking up every morning. So, like, you have to give them so it's just a different thing versus it's just you and the thoughts that you may feel differently, Right.
It's also interesting because when you don't have children, you don't know that, like, a pregnancy that you lose in the middle of the pregnancy is not the love you have for that baby or the feeling you have for that baby. You don't know that it's not as great as the feeling you're going to have for your 3-year-old that you're making breakfast for every morning and giving all your energy to and like that you really have a relationship with.
Right.
As in, to me, it almost felt like my child died. Like that was the feeling because I didn't know otherwise. And it's interesting because as soon as I held my living baby and, had a relationship with my baby, actually, that was also a big part of the healing process for me. And again, like I'm only reflecting my own experience. I'm sure there are people who feel a much stronger connection with the baby that they lose. But personally, like I just felt like because I didn't have children, like it was just such a focus. And it was like, right now it was like, hi, my name is Shaindie and I lost a baby. Like that was basically my identity at the time and the way I felt about my life.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And it's, again, one of the things we tell people who lose children, again, whether it's at 20 weeks or it's 30 weeks or even after they're born or whatever it is, that, different people, again, they go through life differently with that. And for some people, that child is one of their children, part of their family. Like it's sort of in a certain sense, like in the family photo, they say like, I have 4 children, one of whom I lost at 24 weeks. And that's for some people the way, like that's how they view their family. And other people, it's not. And there isn't a right or a wrong. And it's not like having a baby replaces the one you lost. It doesn't work like that. It's just for you, it changed your identity from I'm a person who lost a baby to I'm a mother.
Right.
And you didn't really feel like the mother until you had a living child. Whereas other people feel like a mother when they have a child they lost. And that's, again, there's no right or wrong here. It's just how your brain and your emotions work through these things.
I do feel like I almost felt like the mother, but I didn't feel like I got like the credit as the mother.
Right.
So I felt like people would be talking about like their birth or their labor or their pregnancy. And I'd have to be like, yeah, well, in my pregnancy, like give myself the credit of being the mom.
Yeah.
And like almost like I needed to have the baby and be the mother, like universally, like in a sense where it's universally understood, like I'm a mother, not just because I carried a baby until I feel like a mother.
Right.
It's all interesting. I know that so many people like process differently, especially like at this point where I really have spoken to so many different people and like we've hosted support groups in our home and had all different people with different experiences and like people really, really have so many different ways of processing and there's no like right or wrong way. But yeah, in my experience, I knew I needed to have a baby and be a mother. And like, I knew that would help me in a sense, close that first chapter and give me the closure that I needed.
Now, I imagine, I don't know, you tell me, were you able to be supportive to others before you had your living child? Meaning in that time period between having the loss, processing it to some degree, and then having your baby afterwards, were you just like I'm dark and I'm focused until this happens? Or were you already speaking to people who are undergoing losses?
I think like I had this like adrenaline and I was like drinking my own Kool-Aid kind of like I was in this like although I was feeling dark, like when it was late at night and dark in my apartment and dark outside and whatever, I definitely like, it was definitely a very, very painful time for me. But the way that I was dealing with it, like like from an actionable perspective, was kind of like very talking positive. Like, I'm okay. We're going to be okay. This was meant to be. You know, we're so grateful. You know, thank God I'm healthy and you know, we're great and I have the best husband. Like, I was focusing on all the things that were positive, and I was trying very much to be in a positive frame of mind, like maybe like, you know, manifesting, I guess. Like really, like I didn't want in any way to be pitied, and I didn't want to pity myself either. So I was trying very hard to be positive. And I think also my way of being positive was also a little bit by disconnecting. So I was kind of like, no, I'm good. That, you know, that pregnancy's over now. Like, that was kind of the way that I was processing at the time and dealing with it. And I had to deal a little bit more later on, like once that time actually did pass. And I actually, after I had my daughter, I did like then process things like from a different perspective once I was able to. But I think that at that point I was actually able to. Like, I think originally I needed to be able to disconnect and be in that positive frame of mind and kind of like just work on like moving forward. So I did speak to people. Like I said, my best friend had a loss prior, and a few people that I know also had like right around that time, someone who lives near me, a good friend of my family's. And we like kind of just had like our little club, like, you know, we were talking to each other a lot, and I felt like we understood each other and we were all kind of experiencing a very similar thing, even if we each had our own ways of grieving.
Right. The sad little club.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So really only once I was in a better frame of mind was I actually like looking to speak to people and happy to speak with people. But I definitely was like, if there was anyone that I was exposed to at that time, like I was in a very positive like frame of mind of like trying to work through it and move forward. And yeah.
Wow. Tell me about the next pregnancy.
So then I got pregnant. It was like 6 weeks later, very quick. And I think like my grief just turned into anxiety. I was basically...
You don't say.
I was literally just a mess. I started off the pregnancy in Israel, and my plan was that I think it was 16 weeks, I was going to come into America and continue the pregnancy here. So I landed in America, and then COVID broke out.
That's correct.
Literally, like, I remember like on our flight in from America, seeing like people with like wiping down their seats, and we were like, okay, those weirdos. Like,
yeah, like why is that person wearing a mask?
Right. And we like were hearing about this virus, China, something, and we were like, I don't know, okay, these people think this is serious. Like,
yeah.
And then we landed in America, and literally within 2 days, anyone I know who was in Israel was on the road back for COVID, like to get out of the country.
Right, because they were going to shut the borders down.
They were shutting things down, and you know, a lot of the people I know in Israel also are from America originally, so they were just coming back here. And my parents were in Florida with my grandparents at the time, and came back 2 days later, and I guess COVID from Florida, where my grandparents apparently had it, to New York, and we all had COVID very, very early on. I remember like me and my siblings being like, don't tell anyone, like, you know, they can't know that we have COVID.
Right. Well, it's probably the best thing that happened to you to get it early on.
I got it early on, for sure. So that was just the middle of my pregnancy, and I had COVID. I was COVID positive. I think I was one of the first in the office. Yeah, but at that point, our plan was that we were going to just monitor things and see how things evolve and then treat accordingly. Like, we didn't want to like assume that something like, you know, what did or didn't happen in the last pregnancy was... Right.
Now, I think we did give you progesterone, though.
I started
automatically
with... Yeah. We did do progesterone automatically.
Yeah.
At that point, we were doing the
cervical lengths and everything.
The shots.
The injections. Yeah.
Injections. And then 20 weeks, 5 days, I came in here. It was like, I remember the night before, like really not feeling good and thinking like, okay, I'm in labor, whatever. I'm having this baby. It's over. But I can't go to the hospital because I had already gone to triage at some point, and it was, you know, during COVID. And to go in myself without my husband in the middle of the night, and, you know, you never know how long you're going to be stuck in triage. I was like pushing it off. And I knew I had an appointment in the morning. So I was like, okay, we're in the morning, we're going to get in the car and we're going to go. And I can't think about this until then. And morning came, and during COVID, it was a very quick drive, which was very nice.
Yeah.
And came here and I was doing a cervical length. And I, at that point, was already basically a sonographer. So now I'm a doctor and a sonographer.
You're very educated. Yeah.
And I saw on the screen, like I was able to tell right away my cervix was short. I like was frantically texting my husband, like, oh my gosh, my
because he's probably outside in the car.
He was outside. I remember like my legs starting to shake. Like I was feeling like real panic. And then this was like right before Passover. And like, I literally remember like in the back of my head, like hearing you on the phone talking to someone like, okay, have a happy Passover. Yeah. And I have a sick patient. I have to go. Basically, I passed out and they called me into the office. And after I like, some cold water on my head and whatnot, you brought me to your office and and basically told me that at that point, we were going to place a cerclage and to head over to the hospital and not expect to be home before that night. So that was the plan. My husband drove me around the corner and we went to the hospital. And it definitely was very challenging that it was COVID era because my husband could not come in with me. And this is after like a very recent loss. Yeah. So there was a lot of anxiety. I was also still COVID positive, even though it was already a couple weeks later. I was still testing positive. So no, the nurses were all like in hazmat suits, like scared to come into my room. Yeah. I mean, we knew very little at the time, really and so we're talking the first week of April. Yeah. 2020. So yeah, everyone was very nervous. And I basically was there alone, which was very challenging. But thank God the cerclage was placed and everything was good. Baby was good. And I guess the contracting was at a point where we were comfortable enough for me to go home that night. Yeah. So at about 11 p.m., I we went in at like, I think it was early, like 9 a.m., maybe a little earlier. And at 11 p.m., I was on my way home. So that was that. And then how'd the rest of pregnancy go? And then the rest of the pregnancy was a lot of on and off contracting. Cervix. Yeah, I know the answer to all these questions. Cervix was good. Cervix was a little shorter. I lived it. Exactly. I switched from the progesterone injections to suppositories at some point. And ultimately, I had my cerclage removed at 33 weeks and 5 days. For contractions. And also, like, I think there was a little pressure on the cerclage, like maybe a little dilating. Yeah. But at that point, I mean, you get, right, it's from 20 weeks when this happened and you're thinking, I'm losing my baby, to 33 weeks, right? You're talking it's 3+ months. But I imagine it was obviously a very stressful time, right? A lot of anxiety, a lot of, PTSD, everything's coming back. But by the time that happened, my recollection is like, the anxiety sort of diminished because you knew you weren't losing you're not losing your baby anymore. Like you will or you won't have a preterm baby, but you're in a different like zip code as the last pregnancy already. That, so it just kept every week. It was like another week. All right, I'm a little. This is a little better than last week. A little better than last week. And at that point, you're like, take it out. Whatever. So basically, like at like 20, 21 weeks, 22 weeks, my father kept saying like, how many weeks? And I would be like 21, and he'd be like, still 21. It's going so slow. And I'm like, oh yeah, for you, it's going slow. And really, like every day I would wake up and I'd be like, wow, thank you that we have another day. Like it was really like, I really appreciated every single day of the pregnancy. And I every day was a little calmer than the day before. I can't lie. Basically every week I like Googled like 23-week baby. What does it look like? What's the survival rate? That's good. And then once I hit 28 weeks, I had like a certain sense of calm where like, I knew like I was over a hump. Yeah. And then again, like from 28 weeks, every week was really like a big deal. And then when I got to that point, the 33 weeks, 5 days when I was having my cerclage removed, I was like, get the cerclage out. Like, I want to have this baby already. Like, I felt overdue at that point. Right. So yeah, thank God it went out, but you ultimately still stayed pregnant for several more weeks. I stayed pregnant until 37 and 5 days. And yeah, it was like, I was definitely contracting throughout my whole pregnancy. It's funny because like every doctor I ever spoke to told me like, when you're in labor, like you'll know it will be different. The truth is I really never knew. Like I literally just like flew in here at every opportunity. I was like a frequent at the hospital. And I really also wanted to get there like before I was like in that, too late, painful moment. So I was just always flying here. And yeah, ultimately I gave birth like, pretty full term. Yeah. What was that like, that birth? It was incredible. Like I couldn't have expected or wanted it to be better than it was. Dr. Shaindie was awesome and very calm. And it was just like a really like ideal, like perfect experience. Like I came in at night, I got an epidural, I felt nothing.
But at that time, your husband was able to be with you, right?
My husband, so for birth at that
Right, for birth, correct. So it was because a little bit later.
Once I was, I think it was like once I was admitted, he was able to be in there.
Yeah.
So I remember, I went in, I was admitted, I got my epidural, I went to sleep, I woke up a few hours later and had a baby.
That was a very happy day.
It was
at MFM Associates. It was a happy day. Like Shaindie had her baby. Everything's good. Thank God.
Thank God we could move her bed out of here. So yeah, basically.
My nurses had time to talk to other people. It was great. You know, no, it was just a big deal. We're in it. We're knee deep in it. And so like, it's an amazing thing for all of us when that happens.
I remember like calling the office, and the first time that this happened, I think it was Jamie, the nurse. She picked up the phone and she's like, "Hey, Shaindie." And I'm like, "Oh no, she knows my number. This is a problem." So thankfully I gave birth, and it was a beautiful birth, and I had a yummy baby girl. So
amazing.
That was incredible.
And then you did it again.
And then we did it again. And like really going into my second pregnancy, my third pregnancy, but everything was so different just because I knew I could do it. Like I knew that like my body was capable of it, and I kind of like had a plan in place. I knew this time I was going to have a cerclage placed early as intervention, like preventative. And
it was sort of like all the same emotions divided by 10, you know, like a little bit of anxiety, a little like just much less. Yeah.
And like, you know, we were here in America again for that pregnancy, and I kind of like knew the ropes much more. So everything was just much calmer for me. I knew like a little bit also how to follow my body and like know like what's normal for me, like what's my baseline versus like, you know, maybe for some people, if they would feel contractions every 8 minutes or so, for them, that would mean that they're in labor. But I knew like for me, like that could be normal. And I had all the same intervention. I had my cerclage placed, and I had the progesterone, and came to the doctor very, very often. It's good, you know, I really wasn't working so much at that time. So this was my full-time job. And ultimately, actually at the exact same time my pregnancy had my cerclage removed.
Yeah, same thing happened.
Exact same time gave birth. So.
Yeah, the same thing. Had to get removed at 34 and you delivered at 37.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, amazing. So here you are now, looking back on all this. What do you take away from your whole story, your amazing story?
So I think like I mentioned a few times, like I really learned that everyone has their own personal experience and process differently. And even like at different points, like as time goes on, like I feel like I process things differently also. Like even as I'm repeating the story now, like, you know, it feels much less intense to me as it did back then. But then there's also certain things that maybe I'm able to process more now than that at that time, like I kind of like disconnected from. So I know that everyone processes things differently, but in my experience, like life will be okay. Like I was able to live again and be happy. And that whole dark time in my life, like that was really, really challenging for me. Like, you know, really thank God, like I'm not there, and I have my healthy babies. And one person, like, you know, I always, like at that time, I remember someone saying like, you know, I had something similar and now I have a healthy baby. Like, nice for you that you have your healthy baby, but like I need to have my healthy baby.
I don't. Yeah.
Exactly. So, you know, yeah, I do have my healthy babies now, and I'm very, very grateful for that. But I also know that time in my life, I learned so much about myself and about how I process things, and about how like when people say silly things that like they don't really know better, they don't know what to say or how to be with you, because like I said, everyone's processing things differently and wants different things from people around them. So one person might want someone to feel sorry for them and to make them dinner, whereas I was so not appreciative of someone pitying me in any way. So, and I just wanted to be normal. So like when someone says something that like, you know, if I'm going through something or someone's going through something and it's challenging to have for them, and someone says something that like, why'd they say that? Like, it's because they don't know better. They don't know what you want or what you need from them.
It's from a place of love, even if it makes you feel worse. Yeah.
And like I said, like also like that, like the light comes again. Like even before I had my baby, like every day, like it was very, very hard then. And every day, week, month, whatever that went on, like I got busy with different things, and I was just in a better, happier place. And I guess like that's my takeaway, like just for myself personally. Like I know that like you could be going through something challenging, but like things, you know, life moves forward, and and like chapters closed, new chapters open. And I'm like, I'm very grateful to be where I am today. And yeah.
Amazing. Shaindie, thank you so much. What a great story. We're really happy for you. And I think your perspective on this is really important. And a lot of people who listen to this and either themselves are going through or have gone through something like this. Every story is different, obviously. I'm sure it'll be very helpful to them, but also people who don't go through this to maybe have a little bit more of an understanding of what others are going through and what others are feeling when they go through this so that we can better support them or understand them at least. And so I really appreciate it.
I can't give advice to anyone who like went through something like this because like you said, everyone has different experiences. So like advice is like not really warranted, but to like people who are the friends or the, the people who are watching someone experience something like this, like the best advice is to follow their lead. Like if you feel like someone wants to talk to you, to talk, but if you feel like they don't, then don't. And if you feel like someone is, trying to, needs like to be a little emotional or needs a little bit of like to share a little bit of their story or be a little, taken care of, like you just like follow the lead. Like I think that's like a big one.
It's great advice.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming in, Shaindie.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Healthful Woman Podcast. To learn more about our podcast, please visit our website at www.healthfulwoman.com. That's HEALTHFULWOMAN.com. If you have any questions about this podcast or any other topic you would like us to address, please feel free to email us at hw@healthfulwoman.com. Have a great day. The information discussed in Healthful Woman is intended for educational uses only and does not replace medical care from your physician. Healthful Woman is meant to expand your knowledge of women's health and does not replace ongoing care from your regular physician or gynecologist. We encourage you to speak with your doctor about specific diagnoses and treatment options for an effective treatment plan.